My son mocked me in front of the waiter, saying, "Dad can't even afford his own meal. Don't worry, we'll cover him." While the table chuckled, but when I paid the bill with a card. They'd never seen, the room went silent, his joke backfire. If you're watching this on your phone on a crowded bus or lying awake in bed with the lights off, tell me where you are right now, because I want to know if humiliation sounds the same in your city as it did in mine. I want to know if a laugh can sting across oceans. It started with a laugh, my son's, bright and careless, bouncing off the tall mirrors and wine racks of a place that didn't know me yet. The waiter had just set down a basket of bread when my son lifted his voice so everyone could hear. "Don't worry, Dad can't even afford his own meal. We'll cover him." The table chuckled. My son, his wife, her brother, a couple they'd invited along for the show. The waiter froze for a breath, eyes flicking to me the way a man glances at a dog that's been kicked. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't correct my son. I let the laugh settle in the room like dust, and I folded my napkin across my lap as if that was always what I planned to do. I could have said many things. I could have snapped his name like I used to when he was 8 and sprayed juice across the rug. I could have asked him what he thought he knew of bills, of work, of money that isn't loud, money that doesn't need to tell a joke to feel real. But I looked at the waiter first. He had a careful expression, one that said he had heard hundreds of conversations that weren't meant for his ears, one that said he would carry secrets to his grave because tips are better when you don't remember faces. I gave him the smallest smile, the kind a father gives a nervous teacher on the first day of school. "We'll start with water," I said softly. The boy nodded gratefully and left, and my son took my silence as a cue to lean back and toss another shiny pebble into the pond. The table laughed again. I counted the beats of it, 1, 2, 3, and felt something inside me click into place. Not anger, not heat. Something colder, smoother, like a blade that has waited in a drawer for years. He had chosen a busy Saturday night and a restaurant with polished cutlery that reflected the ceiling lights like thin falling stars. He wanted an audience, and he had one. The couple across from us whispered behind menus. My daughter-in-law smirked and adjusted her bracelet so the stones would catch the room's attention. My son's foot bounced under the table. He does that when he's performing, a drummer counting himself into a solo. He spoke loudly about new deals, about friends who had been upgraded, about cards that came in velvet envelopes. He had that swagger a man borrows when he thinks his story is going well, and for a moment I watched him as if he were a stranger's son, a character on a stage, lips, moving to lines that would play badly in the morning. My napkin's edge trailed over my knuckles. The fabric was cool. I turned it once, twice, the way I used to roll screws between my fingers when I stood in a cold garage, waiting for an engine to purr after weeks of refusing. I remember that garage better than I remember my own birthday. I remember the breath turning to steam, the radio low to keep the neighbors sleeping, the smell of oil and coffee. And I remember her, my wife, standing in the doorway in her robe, laughing at the way my hair stood up like a brush. She would hand me a mug with both hands, as if the heat might run out if she held it with one. "You'll wake him," she'd whisper, nodding upstairs to the boy who now entertained a table with the price of wine. Back then his feet were small and always cold. He'd climb into our bed just before dawn and burrow between us, pressing his toes to my shins. He would ask me how many bolts held a car together, and I told him the truth. Not the bolts. Trust. We had dinners on the floor when the table was covered in laundry, and birthdays with lopsided cakes and wax stuck under our nails because the candles were cheap and crumbled. He blew them out like a king anyway. When he wanted a bicycle with blue spokes, I worked an extra month and fixed a neighbor's dead sedan for free, just so the man would recommend me to someone who could pay. I wiped grease on my jeans and did not tell my wife how my back hurt from crawling under cars that sat low and mean. When the boy scraped his knees learning to ride, he refused my hand because, "I've got it, Dad," and I let him wobble and find his balance because I wanted him to know his own legs. I took late jobs so I could say yes when school trip forms came home. And I learned to fold receipts into a neat stack because every allowance had a math problem that love alone could not solve. When my wife got sick, I sold tools and clamped my lips against the sound that wanted to escape my chest. We ate soup at midnight and pretended the steam was fog on a morning lake, a place we would visit when she felt strong again. She laughed through it, The way some women are brave when no one is watching, and the boy drew pictures for her, and I kissed his head, and we were a family that believed mornings would always arrive. The waiter brought the menus and placed one in front of me with a small nod, the kind that says I saw what happened without getting involved. My son didn't notice him. He was too busy telling the others how these fancy places can be confusing for old-timers. And the laugh came again, the weak kind people give when they know the joke is a little cruel, but it's easier to follow the current than swim. "Order something simple, Dad," he said, tapping his menu as if he were a host on a show. "We'll handle the complicated stuff." I looked at the list, words dressed up and scattered like confetti, and chose the first dish that reminded me of the food my wife used to make on Sundays when the house smelled like rosemary and sunlight. "That one," I said, "and salad." The waiter smiled, grateful for any anchor in the noise. "If you're watching this in a cafe with a cup going cold, tell me if the room you're in also has that moment when the world shifts a fraction and you know it, but no one else does. Because while my son performed, I felt it, an invisible hinge turning. I studied his face the way a man studies a map before a long drive. I saw the new lines at the corners of his mouth, the small twitch of his left eyelid when the bill crossed his mind. Money makes calm men fidget. He wasn't cruel because he was rich. He was cruel because he needed everyone to believe he didn't need anyone. That is its own kind of poverty. My wife used to warn me about this hunger. "Teach him to stand on his own," she'd say, "but remind him to reach back." I tried. God knows I tried. There is something else I should tell you, since you're here with me, listening. Years ago, after everything I had saved was nearly gone, and then, because life has its strange turns, the work I had done for decades started paying in ways I never expected. I made myself a promise. I promised that if fortune finally found our door, I would let it sit quietly in the corner with its coat still on. I wouldn't parade it. I wouldn't let it change my voice or my walk or the way I carried groceries up a flight of stairs. I would keep it like you keep a letter from a friend, folded, safe, close to the heart, not waved in the street. I didn't even tell my son the whole story, because I wanted him to learn something harder and truer than inheritance. I wanted him to understand that respect is a kind of currency more fragile than any metal. The bread arrived warm. My son tore it as if he were in a hurry to prove he had better things than bread. "Dad," he said, "you know this place is a stretch for you. Next time we'll pick somewhere suited." The word curled between us like smoke. I thought of my wife's hands, the way she would smooth the edge of a tablecloth before guests arrived, and how she would catch my eye when someone said something sharp and foolish. She had a look that meant, let it pass, or don't. I never fully understood how a single glance could carry a choice. I felt that look now, from memory, and I let the smoke of his word drift toward the ceiling and disappear. "Eat," I said simply. He rolled his eyes as if the syllable were old-fashioned and too heavy for his tongue. People ask me later why I didn't walk out then, why I didn't put my napkin on the table like a white flag or a dare and leave him to his echo. I think of you asking me that now, in the comments, telling me your own stories of fathers and sons, of dinners that taste like betrayal. I stayed because walking out would have given him the ending he wanted, the Sazi picture of himself as a generous man rescuing his poor old father from a tab he could not manage. I stayed because dignity doesn't run. It sits down, it straightens its back, it listens, and when the time comes, it speaks. My daughter-in-law leaned in and whispered something to him that made his mouth twist into a smirk. I watched the way her hand rested on his forearm, possessive, like a brand. I wondered what she knew of me beyond what he'd told her, the edited version, the one with jokes where the hard parts should go. The waiter took our order and left. The table around us swelled with sound. Forks chimed, glassware sang. Someone at the bar laughed in a way that said he hadn't laughed in months. I watched the mirror behind my son and saw myself sitting there, older than I felt, the lines on my face like roads that had taken me far and brought me back. I placed my wallet on my knee under the tablecloth. It was a small movement, nothing dramatic, just gravity reminding leather where to rest. I did not open it, not yet. Calm is a language, and I am fluent. When the salad came, I tasted the oil and lemon and thought of the first house we rented, the one with a tiny balcony where my wife kept basil in chipped cups. There we taught the boy to pinch the leaves gently and breathe in the green before tearing it for the sauce. We were not rich then. We were wealthy in the ways people forget to count. time, touch, a door that always opened. She would say grace without closing her eyes, looking at us as if the words were for our faces and not the ceiling. I told my son once that money was like salt, good in small amounts, dangerous by the spoon. He nodded politely and reached for the shaker anyway. "Dad," he said now, mouth full, "I'm serious. Don't make it awkward later. I invited everyone. I'll pay." He wanted the whole room to know it. He wanted credit, not kindness. I set my fork down and met his gaze, and for the first time that night, he went quiet for a second, like a radio between stations. I did not raise my voice. "Eat," I said again, and I let a small smile touch my mouth. Not friendly, not cruel, simply present. He laughed to recover the beat, to assure the table that the joke was still alive and he was still its author. "You see," he told them, stubborn. They chuckled on cue, but the hinge had turned and he didn't hear it. If you're watching this at a kitchen table, if you have a father or a son across from you, look at his hands for a moment. The hands tell you the truth that the mouth can't. My son's hands were restless, all surface. Mine were steady. I have built things, broken them, fixed them, held a woman who was slipping away, and a boy who didn't know yet that you can love and lose and still wake up. I touched the edge of my wallet again, leather warm from my skin, a promise asleep inside. I thought of my wife's last winter, the white light on the wall, the way she asked me to keep. What mattered quiet, and to let our son find his own way, even if his steps were foolish at first. "When he forgets who he is," she said, voice thin but steady, "remind him without shouting." So I didn't shout. I didn't argue with a boy who had made himself into a man who needed an audience to feel tall. I let the room breathe. I let the waiter glide past with a tray that smelled like rosemary and new coins. I listened to the hum of 100 conversations and thought of a small kitchen where two people once whispered about what they could do with a single paycheck and a lot of hope. And beneath the napkin, beneath the quiet and the bread and the careful smile, I felt the weight in my pocket like a heartbeat. Not yet, I told myself. The way you tell a horse to hold before a gate. Not yet. The second wave of laughter came with the wine list, as if the paper itself had a punchline printed at the bottom. The waiter held it toward me first, polite as ever, and my son reached across casually and plucked it out of the air. "He's more of a tap water guy," he said, not looking at me, the same way a magician won't look at the hand that isn't doing the trick. He flicked the list open with 2 fingers. "Something bold," he told the table. "Something that reminds Dad what success smells like." The couple they'd brought along chuckled in that way people chuckle when they think they're at a show and don't want to miss a cue. My daughter-in-law rested her chin on the back of her hand like a queen who is certain everyone is beneath her and therefore charming. The waiter gave me a quick glance, an apology without words, then focused on my son's voice because he had been trained to follow the customer who speaks the loudest. I don't know what success smells like to other people. To me, it has always smelled like hot metal in winter, like rain on dust, like coffee poured into a chipped mug at 4 a.m., while a machine somewhere decides whether it will be kind today. It smells like my wife's hair when she fell asleep on my shoulder in the cheap seats at a movie we couldn't really afford. And we laughed anyway because being there together felt like winning something no one else had noticed was a prize. It smells like the first time our boy ran the length of a field and didn't fall, turning back to see if we had seen him do it, eyes bright with the newness of his own legs. But I didn't tell the table any of that. I let them have their version. I let it float around the stemware and die. "Pick the second most expensive one," my son said, half joking, half serious, doing the mental math of status. "The top shelf is a bit obvious." The waiter nodded and said he had just the thing. As he slipped away, my son leaned back and draped an arm across the back of his chair, wrist loose, watch face flashing like a small sun. "You've got to understand optics, Dad," he said to me, as if I were a stranger he had pulled into his classroom. "The world is branding, presentation." He gestured at the room as if he'd invented it. "If you can't afford the ticket, at least learn the dance." His mouth twisted into a grin. The couple laughed on cue. I studied the twist. It was new. It told me more than his words did. "Optics," I repeated quietly, tasting the word and finding it thin. He heard the echo and took it as an invitation to explain himself to himself. "I mean, there's no shame in being practical," he said, as if the word were a sweater someone else should wear. But at a certain level, you've got to play the part. That's all I'm saying. He turned to the others. We're teaching him, slowly. There it was again. We. A small word with sharp corners. My daughter-in-law patted his arm as though he were a dog who had brought back a trick. She spoke to me then, her voice honeyed to hide the sting. We just want you to enjoy yourself, Dad, she said. Let us host tonight. It's on us. She tilted her head, a performance of kindness. No need to stress. Stress. I looked at her and thought how odd it is that people worry so much about the kind of stress that shows up in bank statements and calendars, and not the kind that sets up home in the chest. The second kind is quiet, industrious. It builds rooms inside you without asking permission. It arranges the furniture, hangs photographs, rewrites the address on your mail. You don't notice it until you open a door and find a hallway that didn't exist last week. I felt no stress, not the kind she meant. What I felt was closer to patience wrapped around bone. It sat with me like an old friend who doesn't need to speak. The food arrived with the wine, which my son tasted like a man who wants the room to note his judgment. He tilted the glass and let the liquid slide in a circle like a coin tracing the rim of a bowl. Yes, he declared, and the table accepted the verdict. The waiter poured for the others, then for me, and when he reached my glass, my son put a hand over it, as if he might save me from some error. He's fine, he told the waiter. He's driving. I wasn't. He didn't know, or he didn't care. The waiter paused, eyes asking me the question my son had answered for me. I lifted my hand an inch. Half, I said gently. The waiter nodded and did as I asked. My son smirked as if I had insisted on training wheels. Remember when we tried to take him to that bistro near the river? My daughter-in-law said to the woman across from her. He asked if they had gravy. They all laughed. The woman lifted her eyebrows. Oh, bless, she said. Bless meaning something closer to poor thing than to holy. My son performed a sigh, palms up, as if to say, see, this is what I deal with. I watched his hands. I listened to the cadence he chose for his sentences, the way he turned everything into a stage prop. The fork, the glass, my face. He wanted to draw lines between us that everyone could see, modern and old, glitter and rust, the man who pays and the man who is paid for. He wanted categories because categories make children of us all. We relax inside them. We stop asking questions. I cut my meat slowly. The knife murmured against the plate. Do you remember your mother's rosemary roast? I asked him, not loud, not soft. The question slid into the space between his next line and the one after. He blinked. What? He said. I looked at the herbs on my plate. She used to tuck the garlic under the skin, I said. Said it mattered where you hid the flavor. If you just throw it in at the end, everyone knows what you did. But if you tuck it under, it speaks for itself. He stared at me as if he wasn't sure whether this was a story or a strategy. He chose not to answer. He raised his glass and pivoted to a toast. To new chapters, he said brightly. To growing up. He looked at me then, the way a child looks at a parent when he thinks the parent won't notice. To carrying the family. The couple lifted their glasses. The woman said, "Cheers," in a voice that came with capital letters. My daughter-in-law's smile sharpened. If you're listening to this with earbuds in, walking down some street with your head tucked into your collar against the wind, tell me if you've ever watched someone you love turn your history into a costume they can wear in someone else's story. It's a strange loss, not loud enough for neighbors to hear, but it empties a room. I let his toast drift past me and settle in the shadow under the table. I didn't bend to pick it up. The waiter came again, this time with the briefest glance that said he suspected there was more in the air than wine. He set the bill folder near my son's elbow because the script demanded it. The couple across from us watched with the interest of people who have seen this scene on a screen and wonder how it will play in real life. My son didn't reach for it yet. He wanted to linger over the moment, to let everyone see what would happen next. He tapped the leather cover with his fingertip, considering whether to make a joke or a speech. He chose both. Now, Dad, he said in a gentle tone that carries a warning, this is the part where you just relax and let me handle the grown-up stuff. He slid the folder open an inch, as if peeking at a secret he already knew. We invited everyone. We pay. It's called hosting. He looked around the table to make sure the lesson landed. I sipped my wine. It tasted like something that had been underground for a long time, and then remembered the sun. Hosting, I repeated, as if I were learning the word for the first time. Hosting means you honor the guest, I said. I did not look at him. I looked at my hands. I placed the fork down, lined it with the knife as my wife used to ask me to do, because order made her feel safe in a world that often wasn't. I thought about what she might say right now, what look she would give me, and I felt it like a warm hand between my shoulder blades, steadying me. Not yet, she would whisper. Wait, let him show you who he is. Let the room show you what it believes. Then speak. The couple to our left stood to leave, and for a moment, the noise of their chairs scraping the floor filled the silence that had stretched between my son's performance and my quiet. When it faded, I slipped my wallet onto the table, not opening it, simply giving it air. My son noticed. His eyebrows lifted the way a child's do when a dog does a trick no one taught it. He smiled as though he were amused by my props. That won't be necessary, he said, in a voice people use to decline things in hotels. We've got it. The couple they had invited along nodded encouragingly, citizens applauding a small civic act. My daughter-in-law flashed the waiter a practiced smile that said, "We know how this works." The waiter, caught between scripts, watched my face. "Let me see the bill," I said to the waiter, not to my son. The waiter's eyes moved to my son and then back to me, the way a dog checks with two people who both claim to own it. My son tapped the folder with 2 fingers, a light drumbeat. "Dad," he said, "I told you." I turned my head and let my gaze rest on him, flat and steady. "Let me," I said. 2 words, not a plea, not a challenge. Just a door, either to be opened or else proven to be locked. The table held its breath. The room felt smaller for a blink. The waiter placed the folder in front of me, with a careful hand, as if he were setting down a bird that might fly. I opened it and glanced at the numbers the way a mechanic looks under a hood and knows what's missing before the owner finished the sentence. The numbers were fine. The numbers were just numbers. I closed the folder and set my palm on it, not to cover it, but to feel the leather cool against my skin. My son laughed, but it was softer now, the laugh of a man who has lost his place and can't find the line. "You don't need to do that," he said, appealing outward to the table again. "He doesn't even—" He stopped. He had been about to say something he couldn't say in front of strangers without tearing something that would not mend by morning. He grinned instead, a brittle thing. "We'll expense it," he told the table brightly. "Company culture. Culture." That word again, dressed in a suit it borrowed. I let it walk past me. The fork gleamed in the light. The mirror behind him reflected my face, my hands, the wallet. My son's foot bounced under the table. His wife's bracelet flashed. The couple leaned in, hungry for the turn. Even the waiter did not go far. He hovered with the attention of a man who has seen arguments dressed as etiquette and knows the moment they tear their costumes off. "Thank you for inviting me," I said quietly, not to my son, not to the table, but to the space between us where the truth lives. He blinked. "You know," I said, letting the words come at their own pace, "you once told me you wanted to be the kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel safe." His mouth opened, then closed, a motion as small as a fish in a pond at night. "You were 12, I said. You had drawn a picture of a house with too many windows. Your mother laughed and asked if you were planning to sleep at all." The corners of his eyes tightened. Memory had slipped a hand under his ribs. He didn't want it there. "People change," he said, shrugging, a gesture that tried to do more work than it could. "And people grow up." "Yes," I said. I let the yes stand there for a breath. Growing up is remembering who you promised to be and then becoming it on purpose. I could feel the table beginning to tip, their attention rolling toward the edge where the view opens. I slid the bill toward me a centimeter, as if measuring wood before a cut. My son leaned back, watch flashing. "Dad," he warned softly, "don't make a scene." I glanced at him then, with a calm too, even to be mistaken for anger. "I don't make scenes," I said. "I end them." The sound that followed might have been a breath or a wave breaking on a far shore. The waiter swallowed a smile and looked at the floor. He tried again, this time dropping the showman's tone to speak to me under the noise. "You know I've got it," he said, almost pleading, a tiny crack appearing above the left eyebrow. "It's not a big deal." I thought of the day he came home at 14 with a black eye and more shame than pain because he'd tried to laugh along with boys who laughed at a girl instead of telling them to stop. He had stood in the kitchen, eyes wet, and said, "I don't know why I didn't do the right thing. I told him the right thing is heavy when you carry it alone, but the weight makes your hands strong." He had looked at his hands then, small and scabbed, and nodded as if he were filing the idea away for later. "Maybe it is a big deal," I said. "Maybe not." I reached down with my left hand under the table and felt the wallet again, the leather warm as skin. I slid it up and set it on the linen. From where they sat, the table couldn't see the card inside. Neither could he. It was still sleeping, but everyone felt the hinge moving now. The couple had stopped pretending to talk to each other. My daughter-in-law touched the bracelet she liked so much, rubbing the metal with her thumb, the way a person rubs a worry stone. The waiter stood still enough to hear the glassware breathe. My son held my eyes because he didn't know where else to put them. "Do you remember what your mother said about flavor?" I asked, my voice almost conversational. He frowned, not sure if there was a trap. "She said to tuck it under the skin," I continued. "Let it do its work in silence. By the time you taste it, it's already changed everything." I picked up the folder and slid my card out of the wallet in one motion, so clean it felt like an old habit waking up. I did not flash it at the table. I didn't hold it up like a trophy or a curtain. I kept it close to my palm, metal cool, edges soft from years of being something I didn't need to brandish. My son's eyes flicked to my hand. He saw what he had never seen before, and in that flicker I watched the arithmetic in his head fall apart and rebuild itself with new numbers. "Sir," the waiter said softly, carefully, like a violinist finding a note, "would you like me to—" I handed him the card. His face changed. Not much. Just enough for the trained to recognize the trained. He nodded once, a little bow that is not about money, but about understanding that some things sit quietly in the corner with their coat on until they are called. He took the folder with the card settled inside and walked away with a step that had gained half an inch of respect. My son watched him go the way a child watches a magician's hand disappear into a hat. "Where did you—" he started, then stopped because finishing the question would mean he had not known something he should have. And pride is allergic to that admission. The couple shifted in their seats. My daughter-in-law's smile held, but the light in it had dimmed the way a bulb dims before it burns brighter or goes out completely. "Dad," my son said more quietly, something like curiosity sneaking past his armor. I sipped the last of my wine and set the glass down with care. "Eat," I said softly, and for the first time all evening he obeyed. He picked up his fork and cut into his meat as if the act of chewing could buy him a minute to decide who he wanted to be next. The waiter returned with the folder, card laid respectfully across the receipt for me to sign. He set a pen down beside it and stood with his hands at his back, posture neat, eyes level. "Thank you, sir," he said, the sir not sticky or fake, but clean. I took the pen and wrote my name the way I always do, slow enough to be clear, fast enough not to tremble. The weight in the room shifted, a tide turning without splash. I added a tip that would matter to a man in a black apron who had learned how to live on other people's evenings. He didn't glance at the numbers until he had stepped aside. When he did, he inhaled through his nose and gave the smallest nod, not to me, but to the idea that sometimes people do the right thing without asking for a witness. My son stared at the page as if letters might rearrange themselves to be kinder to his story. "You didn't have to," he said, weak ground under strong words. "I know," I said. "That's why it matters." He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Is that new?" he asked, chin lifting toward the card as if it were a planet. "No," I said. "It's been around." He studied my face, looking for a joke. I gave him none. His wife reached for her glass and found it empty. The couple exchanged a glance that tried to assemble itself into a future anecdote and failed. If you're watching this at a stoplight that's just turned green and you haven't moved yet because you don't want to miss what happens, I'll tell you. The next sound was the softest in the night. The sound of a boy realizing his jokes have limits. He sat back slowly. The bounce left his foot. He looked smaller, not because he had shrunk, but because the stage he had built under himself had been dismantled without noise. He looked at me the way you look at a building you walked past every day and somehow never really saw until the sun hit it from a new angle and all its lines revealed their purpose. The waiter refilled everyone's water and vanished. The room went on being itself, Plates clinked in the back. The bar glass washer hummed like a summer insect. Somewhere a birthday song broke into clumsy harmony and made strangers grin into their collars. My son put both hands on the table and flattened his fingers as if to steady himself on land that had always been solid. He cleared his throat. "I didn't mean," he began, and then stopped, because whatever he thought he didn't mean had in fact been exactly what he meant when he said it, and language doesn't forgive you for lying to it. He tried a different road. "You should have told me," he said. And there it was, the complaint that children fling at the world when it doesn't match their map. "Maybe," I said. "I was not cruel. I didn't need to be. Or maybe you should have listened when the world told you something without raising its voice." He looked at his plate. He looked at my hands. He looked at the couple and at his wife and at the mirror that told him the same story from a different angle. He rubbed his jaw with the back of his knuckle, the way he used to when math homework pressed down on him hard. I could almost hear my wife's soft laugh from some other room. "He's doing the sums," she would have said, fond and tired and full of love. He was. They came out even. They always do when you stop trying to hide the missing numbers under your napkin. The couple found their manners and said something about the hour. They rose, thanked us for a lovely evening in a voice that sounded like a voicemail from a hotel chain, and drifted toward the door, their curiosity trailing behind them like a loose ribbon. My daughter-in-law excused herself with the kind of smile people keep for photographs and not for living. She walked toward the powder room with her phone already halfway out of her purse. For a minute, it was just the two of us with the mirror and the memory of laughter. "I wanted to make you proud," he said, the sentence falling out of him, as if it had been waiting behind his teeth. He didn't look at me when he said it. He stared at the candle between us, the tiny flame doing its endless quiet work. "I know," I said. "Then why does it feel like I keep pushing you down to climb?" His voice was rough at the edges. He was surprised by it. He had thought the show would run longer. He had thought applause could be a kind of love. "Because you're scared," I said. "Because you think if you stop talking, people will stop seeing you." He swallowed. "And you?" he asked, finally lifting his eyes. "What do you think people see when they look at you?" I smiled, small and real. "I don't think about it," I said. "I think about what I see when I look at me." He let out a breath that thought it might be a laugh, and wasn't. He glanced at the folder one more time, then back at the mirror, then at me. He opened his mouth again, and I waited. Because patience is what you give to someone you love when they are trying to become better in front of you, without knowing how to do it all at once. He closed his mouth, shook his head a little, and said a sentence so simple it almost broke me. "I miss Mom." I set my hand on the table, palm up, the way I used to when he was small and storms were loud. He looked at it, a grown man taking inventory of the world he had built, and the one he had been given, and the one he had lost. He didn't take my hand. He didn't have to. He looked at it long enough for the message to travel the distance between us and arrive where it needed to. Then he whispered, "I'm sorry." Not for this night alone, but for all the little nights that had added up to something heavy. The apology was imperfect and exactly right. I nodded once. We sat with it. The candle burned. The room went on. The waiter brought back my card and its folder, a small book closed after a single clean chapter. He set it down and gave me that nod again, the one men give when they've both seen something and agree not to make a parade out of it. I tucked the card away without ceremony. My son watched the movement as if he were watching a photograph slide into an envelope addressed to a place he had never visited but suddenly wanted to see. He picked up his glass and swirled water the way he had swirled wine earlier, less performance now, more habit searching for a home. "What's next?" he asked, and the question hung there, honest and scared and ready. We walked out into the kind of night that makes the city look like it's holding its breath. The door closed behind us and left the music and clatter inside like a dream we'd both woken from at the same time. The valet lights traced little cones on the pavement. My son slipped his hands into his pockets and stared at the line of cars, as if answers might idle there with the engines. He cleared his throat. "So, what now?" he asked again, quieter, less for the room and more for himself. I looked up at the thin slice of moon and thought of my wife's old joke, how she used to call it a fingernail. Clipping from the sky, neat and a little silly, her way of making the world less sharp. "Now we get some air," I said. "Come on." He hesitated only long enough to remember he had spent the night giving orders, and then he fell into step. The valet jogged toward us, cheerful, professional, ready to guess our mood and mirror it back for his tip. "Which is yours, sir?" he asked me, not my son, and the smallest thing flickered at the edge of my boy's mouth. He looked at me the way a man looks at a door that has moved 3 inches to the left. "The gray one," I said. "Thank you." The keys came with a respectful nod. I tipped the young man the way I wish people had tipped me when I was fitting brakes by the hour, like it could change the kind of day he was having, not just the kind of minutes. He glanced down at the notes and back at me, surprised not by the amount, but by what it said between numbers. "Have a good night," he said, and meant it. We drove without music at first. The city slid by in clean pieces. Neon, brick, a bus stop, where a girl in a red jacket leaned into her own world. A bakery hoarding its last warmth for morning. My son stared out the window and tried to pretend we were two men on an ordinary errand. Ordinary would have been easier. The light turned green and we didn't move for a breath. Then we did. He spoke to the glass. "I thought tonight would be, I don't know, I thought it would be simple." I kept my hand steady at 10 and 2, the way I taught him the first time we rolled down an empty lot in a dented sedan with a praying engine. "Simple," I said, "is the story you tell yourself before you meet the truth." He glanced at me then, quick, searching for the hooks in that line. "So what's the truth?" he asked. I smiled a little and took a right turn toward a part of town that still remembered us. "The truth is, we're going to the old garage," I said. His head whipped toward me as if I'd told him the house we left tonight had burned down. "Why?" The word carried a child's pulse. "Because the air there is honest," I said. "And because it's where we kept tools, and I still believe in fixing things with my hands." He didn't speak. We crossed onto the long road that leads to the block, where paint peels and weeds do what they want between stones. The garage sat squat and stubborn at the end, door tagged with faded names of boys who wanted to be remembered by anyone who walked past. I parked and cut the engine. The night sounded bigger here. Crickets, a rattling shutter down the block, somewhere a radio counting off a slow song. My son hunched his shoulders. "I haven't been here since..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. I had that sentence stored in the same box as other delicate things. I unlocked the side door with a key that had lived on my ring so long it knew my hand. The smell met us like an uncle. Oil, dust, a ghost of rubber. The sweet metallic whisper that only old tools know how to make. I flicked the switch and the yellow light sighed itself awake. The workbench waited with its scars and its memory. On the pegboard, the outlines of wrenches and pliers still marked where they should go, chalk halos for saints of grip and twist. My son stood in the doorway and didn't move farther for a breath. Then he did. He touched the bench with his fingertips the way you touch the forehead of someone who slept while you were gone. "You kept it," he said, almost accusing and almost relieved. I nodded. "Some places keep themselves," I said. "All I did was pay the last bill and sweep when the dust got proud." I crossed to the old metal cabinet in the corner, the one with the left hinge that complains, and opened it. Inside, on the second shelf, sat a black fireproof box with a sticker my wife had placed on it. A yellow sun with a face that was trying not to laugh. I slid the box out and set it on the bench. My son swallowed. "What is that?" he asked. I placed my palm on the lid. "Flavor," I said, tucked under the skin. He managed a crooked smile, then let it fall. "Dad," he said, and there was the boy who used to ask me how many stars lived above our block, how many cars could park side by side in a mile, how many minutes until his mother finished a story. "Just tell me." I keyed the lock and lifted the lid. Paper isn't dramatic. It doesn't glitter. It sits. It breathes quietly. The box held envelopes, the careful kind, with my wife's handwriting on some of them, the neat letters she made when she had time and health enough to make letters pleasing. Under those were a few folders labeled in my hand, smaller and rougher. On top of everything else lay a card twin to the one I had just returned to my wallet. He stared at it as if I had set a bird on the bench and told it to sing. I lifted the card and set it aside. Under it, an envelope with his name in his mother's script. He reached for it and stopped with his fingers a breath away, as if touching it too quickly might tear time. "She wrote that for you," I said. "I promised I'd give it to you when I felt you could hear each word without arguing with the ink." He closed his eyes, opened them. "Can I?" I nodded. He took the envelope and slipped his finger under the flap the way I taught him to open letters without wounding what lived inside. He unfolded the paper. The garage got even stiller. He read. His mouth softened. His eyes moved faster, then slower, then stopped at the last line and stayed there. He pressed the letter to his chest the way children sometimes do with drawings they made and didn't know they needed to. He didn't speak because the language in that letter had his mother's voice, and no other voice should step on it. When he folded it back into itself and tucked it into the envelope, his chin lifted with the effort of keeping himself together. "What did she say?" I asked, knowing and asking anyway because saying it out loud was part of the work. He swallowed. "She said she loved me," he whispered, which was always the first line of her sentences. She said respect is the quiet way love looks in public. He laughed a little through his nose because her words could still surprise him. She said to remember who taught me how to tie my shoes and how to say sorry with my whole face. I felt her in the room then, the way you feel heat from a hand that lifted off your shoulder a moment ago. I opened one of the folders and turned it so he could see. Behind the page with numbers and letters that mattered to banks lived a simple sheet with the heading we had argued over on a late night years ago. Family Trust, Sunlight Clause. He frowned at the title and traced the letters without touching the page. "What is that?" "Your mother's idea," I said. "She told me not to leave you money like a puddle a child could jump in and ruin his clothes. She said to build a well and give you a clean bucket and a strong arm." He blinked. "I don't—" "Sit," I said gently, and he did, on the old stool with the paint splash from the day he and I tried to fix a radio and ended up making more noise than music. I pointed to the lines in plain words because lawyers had their pages too, but this one was ours. "It matches you," I said. "Not your ego, not your voice on a good night. You. It grows or it shrinks depending on how your actions line up with who you promise to be." He frowned deeper. "You mean you've been measuring me?" I shook my head. "Number. You've been measuring yourself. I just built the ruler." His laugh was short and cut itself with the edge of shame. "So, the card? That was from this?" I nodded. "There are accounts," I said. "Some came from work I did when the tide finally came in after years of it going out. Some from a company I helped quietly when the world wanted louder names. Some from investments your mother picked because she had a way with people and patience. We put them under one roof. We decided we would never wave it like a flag. We decided we would let it do its work in the quiet." He stared at the page that spoke about scholarships in her name, clinics in neighborhoods she loved, apprenticeships in shops where hands learn and minds rest, matching gifts to the man he was becoming. He didn't speak for a long minute. I let the silence hold. It was strong enough. Finally, he exhaled into his hands. "And me?" he asked, voice careful, like a man stepping onto ice he can't judge by color. "Where do I fit?" I tapped the sunlight clause. "You fit in the light," I said. "When you stand in it, the well fills for you. When you step out of it, it keeps filling for others." I looked at him then, and he couldn't hold my gaze for more than a second, which was another truth arriving. "Tonight," I said, "you stood with your back to it." He nodded without arguing with the floor. He pressed his thumbs into his brow and then dropped his hands. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he asked again, the old complaint returning like a tired bird. I ran a palm along the bench, felt the grooves my hands had made over years, the marks that happen when you lean and think. "Because we wanted you to do right, because it's right," I said. "Not because a card would appear when you were done. Because respect is the quiet way love looks in public." He almost smiled at hearing the line again. It sat better this time. "And because," I added, "if I had told you what sat in this box, I would have stolen from you the chance to become a man who didn't need it." He put the envelope back in the box like he was setting a bird back in its nest. He stared at the second folder, the one labeled with the name of his company, the name he'd insisted on, the name that had annoyed me at first and then grown on me the way Ivy does. "You knew," he said, not a question. "I knew," I said. "I knew when you took money from men who would spend you faster than they would fund you. I knew when you were 3 weeks from making payroll and still smiled for your staff because you never wanted them to taste panic. I knew when I read the terms, you didn't read carefully enough because your eyes were heavy with hope." He swallowed. "And," I slid the folder toward him. Inside was a letter with a name he didn't know was mine, a simple note congratulating his team for turning a first rough corner, a check number he remembered as the week the lights stayed on. He looked up at me as if I had been living inside his lungs and he had only now exhaled enough to find me there. That was you? The lines around his eyes deepened with the shock that isn't loud. It was your mother, I said. Her idea to make it anonymous. Let him feel saved by his own muscle, she said. Let him learn what it takes to hold something up. Then later, when he's strong enough to bear gratitude, we'll tell him. He laughed, and this time it was clean. He wiped at his cheek with the back of his wrist and didn't pretend it was sweat. I don't know how to thank you, he said. You just did, I said. He stood and walked a small circle the way he used to when he was thinking about whether to apologize to a friend he loved after a hard word. He stopped by the pegboard, traced the outline of a wrench with his fingertip, then turned to me with a face that had lost its hurry. What do you want me to do? He asked. The question came out simple as water. I picked up the third folder, the one that held a document with boxes not yet ticked. 3 things, I said. They're not about money, the money will follow. He waited, eyes on me without sliding away. First, I said, pick someone you've hurt with your jokes and apologize without just explaining yourself. You don't get to buy your way out of that. Your mother wrote that note. She underlined it twice. He nodded, already making a list behind his eyes. Second, take 1 afternoon a week and teach a kid something with your hands. Not a pitch deck, not a brand, a real skill. We'll set up a program at the vocational school your mother loved. They remember her there. He swallowed and smiled, small. I can do that. Third, I said, every time your mouth wants to use me as a prop in a story where you climb, stop. Call me. Ask me what I'm doing. Then show up. We'll eat the kind of food you think is too simple, and we'll talk about work that isn't theater. He let out a long breath that seemed to carry the weight of the night with it. And the trust? He asked, glancing at the papers as if they were a horizon. It'll do its work, I said. It will do it whether you help or not. The sunlight clause isn't a punishment. It's a mirror. Stand where you can see yourself clearly, and you'll like what it gives back. He nodded, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt his yes arrive without conditions attached to the back of it. He picked up his mother's letter again and tucked it into his jacket like a vow. He put his palm on the box lid the way I had at the start. Can I come back here? He asked. Anytime, I said. It's not a museum. He closed the box and I slid it back into the cabinet where the hinge complained. He laughed at the sound. We should fix that, he said. We will, I said. Together. He smiled with his whole face then. The apology still there, but now joined by something stronger. Decision. On the drive back, we did play music, not loud, just enough to fill in the cracks that a hard night leaves. He leaned his head against the glass and watched the old part of town turn back into the new, the way roads always teach you that nothing stays the same and nothing is ever completely gone. She really wrote, "Respect is the quiet way love looks in public," he asked, a small grin asking to be sure. She did, I said. She also wrote that I should stop wearing that blue shirt to every family photo because it made me look like a tired cloud. He laughed, a clean sound in the soft cabin light. She was right, he said. She usually was. We pulled up outside his place. The lights in the windows were soft, the way people leave lamps on when they hope a room will welcome them back. His wife stood by the glass, phone in her hand, pretending she hadn't been watching. He stared at the door like a runner measuring the last stretch. You'll be all right, I said. Not because it's easy, because you'll decide to be. He nodded, then turned to me with the most important question he'd asked all night. Are you coming in? I shook my head. Not tonight, I said gently. This part is yours. He rested, a hand on my shoulder for a second, a weight that felt like a bridge. Thank you, he said again, but not to end the conversation, to begin a different one. He stepped out, closed the door soft, and walked toward the light. Halfway there, he stopped and turned. Lunch tomorrow? He asked. I smiled and nodded. Simple place, I said. They have gravy. He laughed and shook his head and went inside. I watched until the door closed. The street was quiet. The moon had climbed a little higher, a smaller fingernail now, clipped clean against the dark. I sat with my hands on the wheel and breathed. The night had edges still, but they didn't cut. I reached for my wallet without thinking, felt the card there the way you feel the heartbeat that has always been working on your behalf, without asking for credit. I tucked it deeper into the leather and slid the wallet back where it belonged. Then I started the engine and turned the car toward a home with rooms that held photographs and letters and, for a while longer, the echo of a woman's laugh that could make even a hard day smile. Morning found me before the alarm did, light climbing the wall like a careful thief. The house was quiet in that way. Mornings are when they forgive you for the night before. I made coffee the way she taught me, 2 slow spoons, water just before the boil, a stillness while it blooms. The steam rose and wrecked me with its kindness. On the table sat a small stack of envelopes I hadn't moved in weeks, and a single photo tucked into the edge of a frame. My wife with one hand on our boy's shoulder, both of them squinting at a sun that wasn't even that bright, just ours. I didn't talk to the picture. I just looked until the kettle hissed a reminder that the living need attention too. The phone buzzed against the wood, face down like it was trying not to intrude. I turned it over. His name. I let it ring twice, then answered. "Lunch?" he said, voice raw in an honest way, like the night had sanded the show off him. "Where we said," I replied. "Noon." He exhaled, and I could hear traffic, a door closing, the sound shoes make when someone stands and doesn't know where to walk yet. "Okay," he said. We didn't say more. We didn't need to. The diner had a bell above the door that fought to be cheerful, and red leather that had forgiven more apologies than most churches. The waitress wore her hair up with 2 pencils stuck in it like crossed flags. "Back again?" she smiled, because she remembered me, and also because this kind of place remembers everyone who returns. I took a booth by the window. He arrived 3 minutes later than noon, which is how long it takes a man to decide to be on time when he isn't sure he deserves the meeting. He slid in across from me and didn't reach for a menu. "Gravy," he said quietly, trying on the joke without needing it to land. I nodded, and the waitress laughed like we'd all been in on something. For years, we ordered what you order when you want food to do its job and not audition for the role of your personality. He folded his hands, then unfolded them, then lined his thumbs and looked at me like a student who had finally found the right class. "I called the restaurant," he said. I didn't react. I asked for the manager. I told him I'd been loud and foolish and that their waiter didn't deserve a night like that. I gave him the waiter's name. I asked if I could speak to him. He swallowed. He came on the line. I apologized. I didn't explain. He blinked quickly, a tell I'd learned before he did. He said he appreciated it. He said people usually argue with him about what they meant to say. I told him I meant what I said, and that's why I needed to say something else now. He let out a breath. "I'm going there after lunch to look him in the eye. That's the first thing." I sat with that, let it take its place at our table. "Good," I said. He nodded once, almost a bow, and pulled out his phone like it was a notepad, not a weapon. He scrolled, then turned the screen to me. The email was short, clean. A message to the vocational school with my wife's name on its wall, offering his afternoons and any tools we had, asking who needed hands the most. No logos, no link to a press release. I read it, then handed the phone back. "They replied already," he added, surprised that the world says yes to certain kinds of questions right away. "They want to meet Thursday. They asked if we could run a Saturday program. They used your name." His voice softened. "They used Mom's." The plates arrived then, and the diner did its trick where it turns into a small country where the borders are salt and ketchup and no one goes hungry. He picked up his fork and didn't pose with it. "I also messaged my team," he said, between a first bite and a swallow that sounded like relief. "I sent it to the private channel. I told them that our culture has been showing off instead of showing up. I told them I've been part of the problem. I apologized to our junior staff for making jokes at meetings when I was nervous. I put in writing that their pay and their time weren't props for my story. I told them I'm ending the expense it for optics nonsense. I wrote that respect is the quiet way love looks in public." He glanced up, a little embarrassed to borrow her words. "I credited Mom," he paused. "I credited you." I buttered bread slowly. "You don't have to credit me," I said. "You just have to be the man who doesn't need to." He smiled and it reached his eyes without asking permission. He took another bite and then set his fork down like he'd remembered something important. "The couple from last night," he said. "I sent them a message. I said I'm sorry for making entertainment out of the person who made me possible. I told them if they ever hear me do it again, they should leave. I told them I'll understand." He winced because that part would cost him, and that meant it was the right price. The waitress returned to ask if everything tasted okay, even though she knew it did. He thanked her with his whole face, and she gave him a look mothers keep in their pockets for lost boys who are finding their map. When she left, he leaned forward. "The trust," he said. "I won't ask for numbers, not because I don't care, because I do. I want to stand where I can see myself clearly. I want the Sunlight Clause to be more than a name." He toyed with the edge of his napkin. "Can we open the garage Saturdays? Teach kids to fix what's broken. Small engines, bikes, radios, whatever shows up." He grinned. "Hinges that complain." We both laughed, and in our laughter, there was a door opening. "Sunlight Saturdays," I said, the words tasting like a place we could both go without getting lost. He nodded. "We'll hang a sign," he said. "We'll keep it small and true." He reached for his water and paused. "I know I can't fix everything with money or with apologies." He swallowed carefully. "But I can start. I'd like to start." I didn't keep him waiting. "You already did," I said. We ate what remained without racing. He told me he had slept badly but well, like his body was new at telling the truth. He told me his wife had asked him hard questions when he got home. Good ones, not because she wanted to win, but because she wanted him to. He told me he'd shown her his mother's letter. She had cried in a way that made sense to him only now. He told me he had taken off his watch and put it in a drawer, not because watches are bad, but because this one had been a mirror he kept checking for the wrong face. "I want to buy time a different way," he said, "with minutes that matter." He smiled, and it didn't perform. It lived. When the plates were clear and the coffee refilled, he looked toward the door as if there was work waiting on the other side, the good kind, the kind that fixes more than it breaks. "Come with me to the restaurant?" he asked. "Stand with me while I say the words." I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "That part is yours." He let the disappointment pass through him and not around. "Okay," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. My name in his handwriting, careful, like he'd practiced. "For the vocational program," he said. "First donation, from me, not the company. Don't put my name on a wall." I slid it back to him. "You bring it Thursday," I said. "Hand to hand, not envelope to desk." He nodded, tucking it away like a warm coal he'd keep alive until it met kindling. We paid at the counter where every bill is a conversation. The waitress tried to give us a free slice of pie just because she was that kind of person. We declined with thanks because generosity should flow to where it's most needed, and today that was her tip jar, not our plates. Outside, the day had gone from soft to bright. He squinted and then laughed at himself because last night he'd been the kind of man who wore sunglasses in the dark, and today he was the kind of man who blinked into sunshine without hiding. "I'll call you after," he said, meaning the apology. "No need," I replied. "You'll know if it was the right kind. Your chest will feel lighter and your feet heavier." He tilted his head. "Heavier? Because you'll be grounded," I said. "The earth will take you seriously." He nodded, and I could see him filing the line to use later on, someone who needed it. He hugged me then, quick and strong, not to trap me, but to touch the ground on both sides of the space between us. When he let go, he didn't step back far. "Sunlight Saturdays," he repeated. "I'll bring the paint for the sign." I tapped his shoulder. "And I'll fix the hinge." He laughed and walked to his car in a way that made the pavement seem to approve. I didn't go home yet. I drove to the garage. I rolled the door up and let light find the corners it hadn't seen in too long. Dust lifted like confetti at a parade no one announced, but everyone was glad to attend. I pulled the old stool to the bench and wrote a list the way my wife used to. 3 items only, because too many becomes a dream instead of a plan. Hinge, brooms, signboard. I found a jar of screws that had been waiting for a decade to be chosen, and a hammer with a handle that still knew my grip. I oiled the hinge, and it argued less. "There you go," I said to no one, and to her, and to the part of myself that has always believed that metal loosens its jaw when you talk kindly to it. A boy rolled past on a bike with a chain that popped, the kind of pop you can hear with your eyes. I waved him down with a 2-finger greeting that says, "No threat, just a man with a wrench." He circled back and braked with sneakers, a skill as old as play. "Chain's talking," I said. He grinned. "It's loud." "Want it quiet?" I asked. He nodded so hard his hair said yes too. "Then get off," I said, "and get your hands ready to learn." I didn't do it for him. I knelt beside him and showed him with my hands and then with his. We unhooked, retentioned, tested. He grinned bigger, rode a slow circle, then stopped in front of me like he had returned from a country he was eager to describe. "How much?" he asked, polite even in joy. "Bring me 2 friends on Saturday," I said, "and tell your mother you learned something useful." He saluted, a salute that was all wrist and pride, and sped off with a chain that had learned its manners. By the time the sun lowered itself to a more forgiving angle, the hinge had made peace with the door, the floor had agreed to be a floor again, and the signboard leaned against the wall with a first coat of white promising to become a word. I painted the name slow, not perfect, because perfect breaks easily. Sunlight Saturdays. I stepped back and the words looked like they belonged to the place. I could hear her laugh in the shape of the S. I could hear my boy's smaller footsteps running patterns between the letters. My phone buzzed. A message. Just left the restaurant. He forgave me. I forgave me too. Thank you. P.S. Hinge fixed yet? I smiled and sent him a photo of the door open wide and the sign still drying and the bench cleared, like a stage for the kind of work that never needs an audience. He sent a heart and then another message that made me sit on the stool and breathe the way a man breathes when the puzzle that used to be a family starts to look like a picture again. Thursday, you, me, the school. Saturday, kids, tools, noise. And Sunday, Rosemary, at my place. I'll tuck the flavor under the skin. The evening came as if it had been invited properly this time. I closed the garage, not to shut anything out, but to keep the good in. On the way home, I passed the river. People stood on the bank with paper cups and paper lives that felt less fragile when they touched. A man taught his daughter to skip stones, and she failed with joy until she didn't. And then she screamed like she'd invented physics. I drove slower than I needed to. The world was in no rush to be worse, not tonight. At home, I took the card from my wallet and held it like a photograph of a person I respected but didn't need to impress. It had done its work the way salt does. Quiet, essential, dangerous by the spoon. I slid it back where it belonged, behind the license that has my name and my age and none of my story, and the photo of my wife tucked behind everything, keeping the lights on. I made tea because sometimes coffee is a promise and tea is a conversation. I sat by the window and let the day pass its report. My hands smelled like oil and paint and soap, honest smells. Success has 1,000 colognes and none of them beat that. Somewhere, my son was at his table reading his mother's letter again, tracing the lines with a thumb that had just shaken a waiter's hand. Somewhere, a boy rode a bike that didn't shout at him. Somewhere, a school custodian unlocked a room that would hold a Saturday full of noise that teaches. Somewhere, my wife's name on a plaque caught the last light and shone enough to make a hallway warmer. I didn't ask for more. The more would come when it was invited by work and not by performance. If you've stayed with me this far, if you're on a bus, at a desk, under a blanket, standing at a sink with your phone propped against a glass, if you've tasted something familiar in the way the laugh sounded, or the bill arrived, or the apology felt heavy in your mouth, tell me where you are. Tell me who you'll respect out loud tonight and who you'll stop turning into a prop. Tell me what hinge in your life is complaining and how you plan to oil it. And if this story found you at the right time, do the small, brave thing. Like, share, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe so we can keep each other honest in the quiet.